All right, welcome. This is the Fall 2021 Student Organization Advisor Workshop. I'm Dustin Lewis. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director here in Student Involvement. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. So what I'll do is walk through the Student Org Advisor Workshop. I'm going to intentionally stop at different moments where I'm pointing out either policies that have changed or some things, as I said in the email, inviting all of you. We've seen things flexing to the minute at this point with COVID-19, especially related to travel. So I want to make sure that I can answer questions for those of you who are tuned in with us. And anyone who is watching at home later or reviewing this, you're more than welcome to email me anytime at lewisd6@xavier.edu. So I start off just want you to see and be familiar with our team because the Student Involvement, Gallagher Student Center, and Commuter Services team works to support a lot of the events and activities that your student organizations work with. Namely, myself and Jill Finch are the primary contacts with a lot of our student orgs. And then Dr. Leah Bosom-Klanowski is the director of our team. Ryan Spolar might be a more familiar face or a newer face to the group. If you don't know Ryan, he is currently serving as the interim director for Gallagher Student Center. So Ryan manages that space. The mission of our office, I'd like to start off with, is we believe that through involvement, individuals discover their passions, develop their strengths to lead a purposeful life. So we use Discover, Develop, Lead as our model. The way that we introduce this to students is that we hope we can help people sort of enter into the work that we do with our student organizations by discovering what they care about. And that's where students explore and find, here are the things I want to invest my time with while I'm in college. We hope that then will filter down to folks who are willing to develop their strengths. That often is found in some sort of a leadership opportunity or stepping up and volunteering, engaging beyond just that entry point with their student organization. And then finally, leading a purposeful life. We very much believe that the skills that are developed in student organizations can help people in their vocational discernment and going forward in the way that they interact with others and what ultimately yields a purposeful life. So let's jump into student organizations. Again, I will pause a few times for those of you that are tuned in live with us to see if you have any questions, but I'm going to spend some time in finance, and then I'm going to spend some time in the event policies and wrap it up explaining the baseline program. So the student activity fee, I think this is always a great spot to start off. The activity fee is collected from undergraduate students, and it's $115 per semester for full-time enrolled students, $12 per credit hour for part-time students. The reason I think this matters and the reason I like to start with this is that broadly speaking, our club enterprise supports undergraduate students. We do have some graduate organizations, and we're actually in the process of trying to form a new graduate group. But we are working to build that model out and helping support the graduate school as they hopefully launch a sort of clear pathway for graduate groups to form. The biggest piece is virtually everything I'm covering today really is supporting that undergraduate experience, because the activity fee is funded by our undergrads and goes to support the undergraduate clubs and organizations. Tied with that, one of the policies that our office helps to enforce, which there's just a couple of places where this is a little fuzzy, is that the leadership for student organizations, when it relates to these undergraduate clubs, should be undergraduate students. There's a little bit of a flex there, especially related to our students who are in like an OT program where they naturally transition in the middle of what would be their senior or their fourth year from being an undergraduate to a graduate student. But as that program is being phased out, we'll be having conversations about clubs like that becoming a graduate organization, since those are the students that they'll be supporting. But for the most part, the rule of thumb is the officers in your club and organization should be undergraduate students. It doesn't matter if they're part-time or full-time, as long as they're degree seeking and undergraduate. The SGA, Student Government Association, allocates the activity fee through two different mechanisms, which, knowing the folks that are on the call here, we do have some groups that are represented in both of these sort of pots of funding. UAOs, which are university affiliated organizations, and subordinate bodies, they receive funding through a process that's managed specifically by the SGA executives. So groups like, for example, Black Student Association, Club Sports, the Newswire, Student Activities Council, Extreme Fans, Alternative Breaks, Resident Student Association, they apply in a process that's earlier than the rest of our clubs and organizations. Broadly speaking, the dates are out there, or if they're not, we'll make sure they get updated on our website. Their application process is throughout the month of January. So as soon as we return back Monday, January 10th for the spring semester, there'll be communication that goes specifically to those organizations to explain, here is how you request your funding for next year. The rest of our clubs and organizations will get a reminder. Their process is throughout the month of February. So broadly speaking, I don't have the dates open in front of me, but they would be able to start submitting their club budget allocation request for all of the other clubs and organizations roughly around the 1st of February, and those are due right before we go to spring break, essentially. So the actual date, I feel like it's March 2nd this year, but we'll get that information in their hands, and they'll get invited and get links and several reminders that that's their process to request their club budget allocations. That would also be the same process for honor societies to make their request for next year as well. So when it comes to funds and accounts, every organization has a fund number. It's a 6-digit number that begins with an 8-1, and it's unique to the organization. I recommend, if you're an advisor, especially with multiple groups, like I know Rosalind Collins is on with us and has multiple organizations, so I'm sure she has this, but that you have a sticky note or a Post-it or something nearby your computer that just reminds you of which organization is connected to which fund. As the advisor, you won't use the fund number too often, but student organizations, they use it frequently whenever they're trying to access any of their finances. To find it, you can go to EngageXU, navigate to your individual group, click on Settings, and then More to see what the student org fund number is. So that's an easy place where you can always navigate and find it. You need it for any sort of financial form or for depositing any sort of funds at the bursar's office. The accounting book, which I would imagine many of you are really familiar with, shows you in pseudo real time how much money is sitting in the fund and able to be accessed by the group. The reason I say pseudo real time, it does update overnight every night. However, there sometimes can be a lag on the person end as money and whatnot gets deposited with the bursar's office. They're not just chomping at the bit to run in and immediately enter it into the group's banner. So sometimes it might gather, and I think that they typically do processing in the controller's office about once a week, maybe twice a week. So it can be that a student group, for example, like student veterans, might do a fundraiser, and they might go deposit that money on a Monday. That might not hit their accounting book until Friday, depending on when it's actually entered into the system. Only officers or admins in the system, as you know, it would refer to administrators of that group as an officer. So you as advisors would also technically be an officer in EngageXU, can access the accounting book for their group. You can adjust permissions as the advisor, or you can work with the officers to adjust permissions if they want to further limit access, so that they may decide only the treasurer should really see this function, only the president should really see this. We would advocate that the advisor always has access to view this. You also, when you're in the accounting book, can click the Show Archives button to look at previous year's allocations and how their spending went. Not sure how helpful that is for all of your groups. With last year being the first year that we were in the system, we did go ahead and preload 2 years worth of data. So when we first started the system, they can go back and look at what would have been FY20, which would have been our last quote unquote normal year-ish for some of our spending. And then FY21 and FY22 are both currently loaded. You can take a look and see where there's a line drawn where the current balance can be found. And that will give you in real time basically the balance that your organization carries. One thing I also want to point out about the accounting book is that from year to year, some of our groups, depending on what they've fundraised and what they've spent, will roll forward a balance from previous years. Where this can get really sticky, and I know with the American Marketing Association, I had to have a conversation with them 3 or 4 years ago. because they didn't realize that they were rolling forward a balance. And so every year when we told the treasurer, hey, AMA got $6,000 this year, they didn't realize that they still had 7 or 8,000 from previous years that had accumulated because they weren't paying attention to what the balance was. They were just following what is our allocation for this year. So I would encourage you as the advisor to have some familiarity with what is the current balance for your organization, because it might be more money than they think it is. When we look at some of the different financial forms, the student cash advance form is the first one I want to stop at. Organizations can take out one advance at a time. Think of this as like petty cash, and they can take out up to $300 in cash in total. The individual student who submits the advance is responsible for the advance. Advisors are not eligible to take out a cash advance. In an emergency situation, there is another system and process, not through the bursar, to access petty cash. I haven't done it in years, which leads me to believe we don't frequently do that with any club advisors. Advances are only considered for fully approved events submitted through EngageXU. So when working with and coaching your student orgs, they should submit their events, get them approved and engaged before they start submitting financial forms. Cash can be used to purchase goods. The point of getting a cash advance would be that a student can then go to Kroger or can go up to Target or Walmart or wherever it is that they need to purchase some things, and they can exchange it at a point of sale for goods. Cash shouldn't be used to pay performers or individuals for any kind of professional services, and it shouldn't be used for any sort of rentals. Students have to return receipts along with unspent cash from the advance to the bursar's office within 7 days. The organization, and more specifically the person who takes out the advance, is responsible for tracking and maintaining those receipts with their advance. And this is a change this year. Students that are listed on the advance, they will be personally charged for advances that are not closed in a timely manner. The bursar's office last year saw there were many student organizations who had taken out cash advances and had just never bothered to turn in receipts or close them out. And so ultimately, the university was on the line and had no record or receipt. Some of them dated back to the fall semester. Students said, I don't have a receipt. I don't even remember what I spent it on. It's been long gone. And so the bursar implemented this year a process saying that student is responsible for that cash. If they don't close out the advance, we will bill it to their bursar bill, which can affect their ability to register, and it can affect their ability to graduate and get their diploma. So they'll want to make sure that they settle that. Any questions as we start forward on the financial forms related to cash advance? Okay. A new form that we introduced this year is called the Prespend Authorization form. This form was created specifically because we had a couple student organizations in the past year where students went out and spent a significant amount of their own money purchasing goods, or perhaps like paying for catering or for an event for their group. And ultimately we said, why did you do that? There's so many other ways we could pay for something in advance, or we can work with a university P card or a check. You don't need to go put $1,200 on your own credit card, or ultimately and problematically $1,200 on mom and dad's credit card, which then they start calling us saying, how could you let my student do this? And we say, well, you gave your student a credit card and they chose to do this. So the pre-spend authorization form we put in place to say, if a student wants to spend more than $300 of their own money and anticipates being reimbursed for that, they need to submit this form and they need to get approval for this pre-spend from their advisor and from our office. Part of what we catch in the pre-spend is that our office says, hey, you know what? You don't need to put $600 worth of Chipotle on your credit card. We have university P cards. We have other mechanisms to be able to pay for this. Let's not put you or your parents on the line for this money. Let's find some other means that make sense and that will make this easier for you to be able to make that payment. The big thing we tell students with this is that if a student shows up with a pile of receipts and says, okay, I need to be reimbursed for all of this, and there's charges for more than $300 and they did not fill out the pre-spend authorization, we're going to tell them, nope, you're not getting reimbursed. So you needed to do this process first. The advisors are the first approver in any of the financial forms, including this one. And so we would just say, be sure to pay attention to your workflows to ensure in a timely manner that forms get reviewed and approved. The student reimbursement form. So this form has also been changed and modified even since I did the first round of workshops back in August with your students. The biggest thing is and we just announced this via email last week, students can now be reimbursed using Zelle. And in fact, Zelle is going to be our preferred method to reimburse students. Zelle is an online transfer that is connected with many hundreds of banks across the country and across the world. Most users who have a checking account have a bank that is compliant and connected with Zelle. And even if they don't, Zelle can connect to their checking account so that the university can instantaneously reimburse the student. What's wonderful about Zelle, it does not act like Venmo, where money moves from a checking account to Venmo, and it then has to be claimed in Venmo to move to your checking account. What's great about Zelle is that the money moves directly from the university straight into the checking account for the student, so that we can then process that reimbursement, and they can not even have to bother with cash or having to go to the bursar's office. It can all be done digitally. Over 300 can be reimbursed to students, but again, they still have to fill out that pre-spend authorization form in advance of being reimbursed. Students do have to upload in the reimbursement form itemized copies of their receipts in order to be reimbursed. Missing receipts will not be reimbursed. The university is tax exempted, so we don't reimburse for sales tax in the state of Ohio and in our surrounding states that all accept Ohio sales tax exemption. The other piece on this, which I'll talk about in just a second, is that advisors can also be reimbursed using an advisor reimbursement form. And that also can be done in Zelle. So advisors can be reimbursed for purchases the organization has approved in advance. What I will say is with the student reimbursement form, the process is student submits, advisor approves, and then it moves over to our office. The advisor reimbursement form is reversed. It's not common that we reimburse advisors, but it does happen. The advisor can upload their own content through the advisor form and their own receipts. It then moves to the student organization to hit approve on the advisor's reimbursement. This is to make sure that advisors aren't taking advantage of any of our student funds, and that what the advisor is getting reimbursed for, the club was knowledgeable about and approved in advance. It then moves to our office. What's wonderful about this is that using Zelle, we're able to bypass the Xavier Buy system, and we're able to, again, transfer money almost instantaneously from the university to the advisor to reimburse you directly into your checking account as well. Just like with students, the advisors have to upload itemized copies of receipts. Missing receipt forms will not be accepted. Those of you who have a P card, you've received multiple times literature from the university. We are no longer accepting missing receipt forms this year, period. The university is tax exempted, so advisors also will not be reimbursed for sales tax. We encourage you to download a copy of the tax exempt form if you're going to make a purchase. The big thing on all of this is that purchasing wants to limit the amount of reimbursement for faculty and staff through the Xavier Buy system. Part of this being that there were a lot of users across campus, not even connected with student organizations, that were taking advantage of the system in a number of different ways. And so what they want to do is they want to make sure that when appropriate, we're using—
No, I'm on an advisor panel.
If you're unmuted, you may want to mute
It's all Xavier stuff.
Once he signs up for everything.
Hey, Quincy, you might want to mute yourself. Okay. They want to reduce the amount of reimbursements with faculty and staff, and specifically because of how some of the choices being made with faculty and staff related to travel were being driven around what's going to generate more points, for example, for a personal card, rather than what's going to be the most economical. So just to be really clear, advisors can be reimbursed, but we want to make sure that the choices you're making connected with that reimbursement are going to be what's best for the club. And we want to make sure that the club is fully aware of any expenses that you're making. So I'll pause for a second just because I know that's all new. I just want to make sure that it's clear and see if we have any questions. And if you do, please unmute and feel free to ask.
Dustin, can you remind us where we can get the tax exempt form?
Sure. There's a few different spots. You probably can just go to Xavier and Google it, but we have it listed on our website. If you go to xavier.edu/clubs, that'll take you to the student organization homepage. You can then click on Forms, Policies, and Resources, and scroll down just a few dots down, and you'll see it says University Tax Exemption Form. That's also where the University W-9 form is located if you ever need that with one of our vendors. Any other questions? Yep. And most businesses, especially if they're large chain businesses, Walmart being the exception, Walmart, but most larger corporations and businesses, you don't even need to bring a copy of the letter in. What they just simply need is the tax ID. So a lot of advisors say, I just open a note in my phone, throw in the university's tax ID number, and then I don't ever have to carry the paper around. I can use it at Kroger, or you can take a picture of it with your phone. Use it at Kroger, at Target, things like that to have tax exempted. Okay. All right, moving on, the purchase form. So this form is used to order items from Amazon or office supplies. This year, we're encouraging our office supplies to come through Brown Enterprise Solutions, which is a company that's pretty similar and competitive to what Office Depot provides. However, Brown Enterprise Solutions is a smaller business, and they're also a minority-owned business. So it's a way we can invest in a direction that the university wants us to invest to procure those things. The Amazon piece is really helpful, and a lot of our student groups use it because the university has a business Amazon Prime account, which means students can browse Amazon, copy over links, and say, hey, here's what I need ordered, send it through the purchase form, and then we can procure it using the Prime account. And there's also no tax. So if your student just buys on Amazon, or if you do as the advisor and then submit it, you're probably going to get taxed and you won't get reimbursed for that. The purchase form, however, is primarily used to pay for vendors. So anytime you're entering into some sort of an agreement or you get a quote from someone, you can upload that to be able to pay a vendor. What we tell students is to not sign any contracts. There's some limited contracts that advisors can sign, and I'll cover that in a second. In order to pay a vendor, though, we do need a copy of the W-9 form from the IRS so that we can set that vendor up in our system so that they can be paid. And ultimately, if they hit the threshold, we then report it to the IRS at the end of the year. The purchase form is not used to hire students. So if, for example, your organization is interested in hiring a undergraduate student to be a DJ or graphic designer or whatnot, they have to be set up through student employment, which they actually would be working, quote unquote, for me, but I'll put them into student employment. It's a pretty easy process. It takes a little bit of time just to get them set up and rolling, but it's an easy process, so they can reach out to me to do that. Any questions about that purchase form? Okay, this is just a workflow approvals chart. So again, them being the students, they initiate the expenditures through like a cash advance or reimbursement or pre-spend authorization or purchase form. It then moves over to you as the advisor to be able to approve. And I noted here that the advisor reimbursement works opposite. It goes to the student org first. Then it comes to us being the Office of Student Involvement to verify and authorize the expense. And then it moves to whatever financial office is going to close it out. So if it's a Zelle reimbursement, that is us. If it's going to be a check, that'll move over to accounts payable. If they're trying to take out cash, that goes to the bursar's office. Contract signature authority, I won't spend too much time here, but the big thing is students don't sign contracts on behalf of the university. Advisors can sign contracts for some different services like renting space or catering, professional services, like equipment rental often needs to also have a certificate of insurance on file with risk management prior to signing the agreement. You're more than welcome to connect with myself or connect with Jeff Coleman's area if you have questions about what you're looking for. There's some minimums and standards when we collect certificates of insurance. Often we're using these with caterers, and we're using them with rentals like you're getting inflatables or some sort of novelty program connected with your event. Some of our companies we use frequently, they have certificates on file that yield for an entire year. So it covers any sort of blanket opportunity the university takes to hire the company is covered under that COI for the year. Performers and speakers entering into contracts should be using a performance agreement form or an independent contractor. It is not very common for many of you as advisors to be contracting performers and speakers, but there are a few of us, like some of the area I work with, and especially like Rosalind has clubs that will frequently use these types of forms. So if you have questions about how to access those forms, let me know, and I'm happy to help navigate that. The big thing is, as of last year, there's a new sort of signature routing authority. These forms have to be signed by student involvement, and they do move up through student affairs because all of our student organizations are anchored in student affairs. So regardless of what division you report up through, anything that's under the provost area, which should be all of us, those route, if it's under 5,000, it gets signed by our office. If it's 5 to 10, it gets signed by student affairs. If it's above 10, it will route up to the provost. And I will say getting anything routed up through the provost will often require a review from legal counsel, which significantly slows down and can take more time in the process. So start early and start often. Reach out to me if you're interested in contracting a performer or a speaker that's going to be of a more significant value. When in doubt, ask first. Give us plenty of time to assist. Contract review can move slowly. The good news is if we've worked with that company or agency before, we can expedite the process a lot. Any other questions about the finance piece? Okay. So events and activities, we're going to cover a range of different topics related to policies and processes. Hopefully this helps to just clarify some different things. And we're definitely going to spend some time at travel when we get to the end of this. Submitting events in EngageXU, student organizations have to submit all their events and activities in EngageXU. This includes meetings. When submitting the event, they'll automatically complete a supplemental form. That's what often gets routed to you for approval. So they then will get your approval to move forward with holding the event. Your approval does not necessarily yield, okay, I'm promising that I will be there or that I'm going to be chaperoning or attending the program. Certain programs do or do not require the advisor to be present, especially if the event is large, higher risk, or if the group is going to be traveling with a large number of people away and further away from campus. That's when a chaperone / advisor would be pulled in for the activity. There's a risk matrix related to travel that you can view on our website on that forms page that allows you to see, like, for example, if a student group is traveling with more than 12 students or someone is under the age of 18, or if they're traveling with people that are not Xavier affiliates, then that would trigger that a chaperone should be present. When submitting the event, like I said, that form automatically is a part of the process. If the organization goes back and makes changes to the form, it sometimes will route for approval a second time, depending on how significant the changes are. And that's just an automated part of the process so that you as the advisor are fully aware of what activities your organization is hosting. We once again, for the second year in a row, and I think this is going to become our normal practice, we ask groups to take attendance in EngageXU. Your officers have been doing a really nice job at this. More than anything, it helps us to understand how engaged our student body is. It also assists us as we still continue to do some contact tracing related to COVID. They can take attendance in several ways. They can look people up and check them in using a laptop or phone. They can scan QR codes, or they can scan all cards. We soon will have the technology to do taps with the RF chip that's going to be in all of the new all cards. So as we phase out the old all cards, we'll be able to have RF readers where a student can literally just kind of like tap their phone or tap their all card and automatically be checked into something. So there's a how-to guide online that walks you through step by step what those different options are and how to get them set up. So when it comes to space reservations, this was a change this year. The event form in EngageXU really acts as a space reservation request for a couple of the bigger, more popular spaces. So the yards, the different Xavier yards and the academic mall, those are all anchored into the event form. And then also Justice Atrium, which would be inside the CAF. That's another popular spot. Those are all part of that event form. As it gets colder, though, obviously those spaces won't be used as much. Classroom spaces are still reserved by the registrar's office. Then Gallagher spaces are done through an online system called Mazevo. The hub reservations are done through the rec sports staff, depending on which space you're trying to use. And then CENTAS reservations are through CENTAS Center staff. We have a contact guide that's available on that forms page on our website, where you can navigate and you can browse and see who are the different contacts to be able to reserve different spaces. It's also linked to the EngageXU event form. So if you or your student group are filling out for an event and you're unsure of who to reach out and contact to reserve space, it'll indicate what you do. Food trucks, just so you know, we are in the process of still writing and creating a food truck policy. Essentially, they're limited on campus due to the university's contract with Chartwells. What we're hoping to do is to be able to approve 5 food truck events in the fall and 5 in the spring. External catering or a drop and go service is completely fine. That's not a part of the food truck concern. The food truck concern literally is that there's an exclusivity arrangement with Chartwells where a food truck essentially is a mobile billboard for a business. So not only are they getting to distribute their product for free, but they're also promoting their business simultaneously. That is the challenge with food trucks related to our Chartwells agreement. The drop and go service is like, for example, Rosalind reaches out with her club and they want to have Raising Cane's come to campus, and maybe they either go pick up like an order of catering or Raising Cane's drops it off. That's drop and go. There's no problem with that. It's more so whenever the business itself gets to create a portable model on our campus and is sitting right out in the middle of campus, being able to promote and distribute food. Food trucks are not permitted to sell food on campus. So any of our businesses that we invite to campus, they have to be pre-arranged for payment because that does violate our Chartwells contract. So they can come to campus, they have to be giving it out for free, or the organization has to have pre-arranged a certain quantity that's going to be made available. So like you prepay for 1,000 conies from Skyline, Skyline comes here and they simply distribute the food that you've paid for. If you have questions about a food truck or you're wanting to bring one with your organization, reach out to me in advance and I'm happy to help you navigate. So when it comes to fundraising, student groups have to register their fundraising activities. This can be sales to members like t-shirts and club apparel. It can be selling to individuals outside, letter writing campaigns, collecting dues. It also can be working an event to generate revenue. So a couple events, they're not as popular as they used to be because I think of COVID, but we used to have lots of our student groups do a lot of work with the Reds at the beginning and end of summer. And then also in the fall with the Bengals doing concession sales. There's also concession sales during CENTAS basketball games. So there's ways for groups to generate revenue. It can also be things like coordinating with Corrido or with an external business to get people to go eat there so that you can get a portion of those profits. Fundraising also includes collecting donated items for charity, like a disaster relief. Student groups are prohibited from selling homemade baked goods. That has to do with the health department. And then when fundraising for any sort of charitable philanthropic purpose, the group is responsible for tracking those dollars so they can be sure what money was actually brought in that was to be donated to the charity versus money that they were given as a part of their activity fee, which can't be donated. The other thing I would note is as of this fall, groups can collect dues and can also take payments through EngageXU. Those payments shouldn't be donations, but they can be selling items. So a few of our groups have been piloting out selling their apparel through EngageXU, and I think have had a lot of success because again, it's all credit card and it's direct payment from the person buying straight into their club fund. So nothing passes through like a Venmo system or anything like that. Campus public speakers, when you're hosting any sort of a public speaker event, student groups have to get approval. With any of these where I'm saying they have to get approval, it's all a part of the event process. So when they're filling out an event form, it's going to say, are you trying to reserve space outside? Are you bringing a speaker? Are you traveling, et cetera, et cetera? Students check every box that applies. Are you doing a fundraiser? And as they check that, there's more questions that open up in the event form to help them get the approval that they're looking for. The request for public speakers has to be submitted through Engage. It will often begin with student involvement, and if it's a larger speaker, if there's more popularity or there's more controversy, it'll route through student affairs in the provost area. Controversial events will not be denied on the basis of controversy, but it'll be considered on how the university best prepare a response to the community or to any interested parties. Academic freedom does not inherently apply to student organization events. So for example, Laura Carney, who's on this call, is a faculty member and has academic freedom related to the courses that you're teaching and whatnot, but that doesn't inherently tie into the club and the organization because that's not a part of your teaching curriculum. That might be a little bit looser of an example since the clubs you're working with are anchored in the academic area. So what we've often said is when a student organization wants to collaborate, and when a professor might say, or an instructor might say, academic freedom is going to give us a little bit of coverage on this event, we would say that the club should really more clearly collaborate with that academic department in order to perhaps advance the event and to say like this really is connected to what we're doing in the academic enterprise as well. Political activities. Due to our designation with the IRS, the university is limited in its ability to participate in political campaigns. We should remain as politically neutral as we possibly can. Student orgs have the opportunity, though, to participate in different kinds of lobbying and campaign-related activities like voter registration. The university just can't endorse a particular party or candidate. Anything connected with political activities also gets submitted through EngageXU, and our office works with Sean Comer, who is the designated director of government relations, to help navigate as needed. Many of our political activities and events are really just out there engaging students, getting them registered to vote, and helping them understand the issues. So many of our activities really clearly sail through the process and quickly. Student alcohol events, I won't read through this, but I will say when it comes to getting alcohol approval at an event where students are going to be present, the alcohol and other drugs policy spells out how that works. They essentially have to prove several of these considerations. Actually, I'm sorry, they have to prove all of these considerations in order to get an approval for their event. So things like everybody who's drinking has to be 21, the majority of the attendees coming must be 21, the consumption of alcohol can't be the focal point, et cetera, et cetera. You as the advisor also have to be present at an event when there's going to be alcohol. Motion picture copyright. So copyright law prohibits student groups from showing any sort of a copywritten feature film or documentary without a public license. Here's one of the other catches, especially for any of you who are in faculty. The educational exemption related to copyright protects an instructor when using the film as part of their regularly scheduled course, but it has nothing to do with student organizations. So again, I'll use Laura as the example of Laura can show any film that she wants within her class with what she's teaching, especially as it relates to the class content. That exemption does not transfer over into the club, even though the club is directly connected with some of the course material Laura's teaching. So there are a couple ways to work around. For example, Netflix has said that their original documentaries do not have to be licensed. The university also has a license that is a sort of a broad cover through a company called Canopy with a K, and that's anchored in the university library. Canopy doesn't have a huge broad library of films, but they do have several international, and they do have some good documentaries, and there are some featured films, especially those that are sort of thought-provoking and centered around culture. So Canopy is also an option that some groups can take. Spectrum U is sort of the wild card, and that is the university has a license with Spectrum, our cable provider. Spectrum U essentially is an app that any student or any user, faculty or staff can download. And as long as you're logged in with your Xavier credentials and you're on Xavier's wireless network, Spectrum U will allow you to stream on-demand content. What's always iffy is we never have any clue what content is going to be available and when it's going to be leaving the service, but those are all options. Aside from that, you'll have to work with a licensing company like Swank Motion Pictures or Criterion Pix USA in order to license whatever it is that you're trying to screen or whatever you're trying to show. When it comes to brand use and promotional material, the university brands and protects and trademarks all of our X and brands and our likeness and whatnot. So anything that the students are trying to order for the organization related to apparel and promotional items has to be submitted to marketing and communications for approval. That form is called the promotional materials and apparel form. Student orgs are allowed to use the primary Xavier University or a secondary brand. If your club wants a more official looking secondary brand, like you can see the student involvement here, marketing is happy to produce those. They will produce them for any of our student organizations that are recognized, so they can get something that looks very official from Xavier, and that's something they can use in what they're creating. D'Artagnan, the blue blob, and also the sword, which the sword you don't see too much anymore. Those are limited to athletic use only. There's some extension where the sword in particular is permitted with club sports, but for the most part, D'Artagnan and blue blob are only used with athletics. The university also limits the vendors that can be used to produce any of these materials. So I'd encourage student groups to go and look at xavier.edu/apparel to see a list of the vendors that are provided. We've narrowed down the list to where several of them are locally owned companies and also minority owned and women owned businesses. But not every apparel company that we've used in the past is a part of the list. They're not all licensed and they're not all included. And so we will only approve expenses related to promotional material and apparel if they choose one of the companies from the list that are fully licensed with the university. End of campus programming. This is not entirely accurate. So campus programming is a little strange this year, in particular for this semester. Technically, the policy is that it's the Friday before finals week. So that, this year that basically would fall right before Thanksgiving. What gets a little odd this year is because like residence halls are closing, the end of campus programming technically still is after most of our students are going to be going back to wherever they're from, especially those that live on campus. Good rule of thumb for this year is that we would encourage campus programming to pretty well wrap up by Friday, I believe it's the 19th, before the residence halls close. There may be a few events that are more centered toward older students or commuter students that are scheduled in that like Friday to Wednesday timeframe. But again, it's a little different this year because of our calendar pivot. Gambling, in short, money can't be exchanged for betting, split the pot, cash prizes with the raffle. Students can't receive cash as a prize. Okay, I'll take a pause real quick before we flip into travel. Any questions about any of the event policies that I've covered? Okay, so off-campus activities, this is not requiring a travel form. Off-campus activities are defined as an event that takes place off-campus within about a 35-mile radius and does not include an overnight stay. So this would be, for example, you're taking a group of students to a Reds game, or you're going to meet a business downtown like Procter & Gamble, or you're going to a park or nature center that's within the greater Cincinnati area. Those are just simply off-campus activities. Those are submitted for approval using the event form like everything else that we've covered so far. Those activities currently this semester do not require that participants be fully vaccinated to participate at this time. Next semester, everyone will be required to be vaccinated, and so those rules will probably flex and change slightly. But currently, if you are just simply leaving the area officially with your group to travel within the greater Cincinnati region, you are not required to be fully vaccinated. Travel, more broadly, a trip or travel is being defined as more than 35 miles from campus or involving an overnight stay. So for example, you're using a retreat facility in the greater Cincinnati area, so you're not going more than 35 miles, but you are staying overnight. That is still considered a trip or travel. Students should be submitting a student domestic travel itinerary form, which is a separate form on our website, at least 3 weeks prior to travel. Travel, anything that's overnight or anything that's outside of the city, does currently require students to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. So that's a part of this process, and that's part of how my job has changed this year, is verifying travel eligibility for any of your travelers. Students with an approved medical exemption must also request and receive an accommodation from Disability Services in order to travel. Students with an approved religious exemption are not eligible to travel. So religious exemption allows you to attend in-person classes and on-campus activities. It has nothing to do with your ability to get on a bus and go to Louisville to go compete with a club sport, or it has nothing to do with your ability to get on a plane and travel to Florida to run a marathon. All individual student travelers have to complete a separate travel participation form that indicates they understand that their vaccination status will be verified. When submitting the itinerary form, groups also can submit a partial travel list early. So if they're within that 3-week time frame and they're like, we don't know our exact final list, great, submit what you have so that we have time to check and verify those that you know are going. If you need to tweak that list and update it a little bit closer to the date, that's completely fine. Before you travel, we need that complete and final list of participants to be submitted, and we need to have verified all of their eligibility prior to departure. Student organizations and advisors should not ask students to disclose their vaccination status, nor should you be collecting copies of vaccination cards. What I have shared with some advisors who've asked, if the destination you're headed to for some reason is saying students have to have proof of vaccination, your job as the advisor and or the student org officer's job is to simply say, hey, where we're headed, you have to show proof of your vaccination. First of all, if you're going to travel, we're going outside the city, you have to actually be vaccinated. You have to have uploaded that to MedProctor and we have to verify it. But you as the advisor don't need to collect copies of anyone's vaccination cards. They just need to know where we're headed. You're going to have to show an original or a copy or a photo of your vaccination card in order to participate. Student organizations should inform their members when they're traveling that they're going to be required to be fully vaccinated and that their status has to be verified through MedProctor. And if it's not verified, they can't travel. They won't be permitted to go. Submitted travel itinerary forms are only going to be approved and the trip will only be cleared to go if everyone involved is eligible to travel. Masks have to be worn in vehicles because a vehicle would be considered an inside location, and any indoor location outside of eating, drinking, active sport, competition, or sleeping. Currently, our campus policy is what supersedes whatever the local policy would be. So that would be anytime you're indoors, aside from eating, drinking, active competition, or sleeping, that you would need to be masked. Vehicles should travel when they're leaving the area at a 75% occupancy, which what that means essentially is everyone gets a window seat. So if you're in like a 5-seat normal car, there shouldn't be a middle person in the back seat. Everyone should be able to have access to a window. If you're in like a 12-passenger van, think of it as every row of seat, there's someone on each side at the window, and that's what your capacity would be. Overnight accommodations should also provide that everyone can sleep at least 6 feet away from one another, and that any large space, so if you're in some sort of a retreat center or there's like bunk beds, etc., that you should treat that at a 75% capacity. Basically, everyone gets their own bed. Chaperones, anyone traveling with the student groups, also have to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. So I'll pause for a second and see if we have any questions related to trips and travel.
Dustin, I do have a question.
Okay.
Is there any guidance coming out about requiring any booster shots
Not
as they're
yet.
becoming FDA approved?
Yep, not yet. And I've saw Johnson & Johnson and Moderna are both getting cleared this week. There's guidance coming out, I think as of today, about how boosters will work, but not at the campus level. I was told that the COVID task force, which I don't think any members of the task force are on this call, but I was told the COVID task force is just starting to broach that conversation of what that could look like. But currently, to the best of my knowledge, as we look forward into what an eligible traveler would be for the spring semester, that person would be someone who's received a full course of vaccine, meaning 1-shot J&J or 2-shot Moderna, 2-shot Pfizer. So good question. We're asking the same questions and we're getting the same answer that you just asked. Any other questions related to trip and travel?
Quick question.
Yep. Mhm.
So with the vehicle should, so that means nobody can sit in the middle of a car or like a van?
Shouldn't, right. So the vehicle should be at 75% occupancy. The purpose would be to try to minimize how much people are really piled in together. And that when in doubt, taking more vehicles and having more room versus less room, especially with the number of breakthrough cases that we've seen on our campus, and with the Delta variant and whatever else could be around the corner. So the idea would be in a vehicle, roughly everyone gets a window seat and that everyone is masked while they're traveling together. The clarity too, and I think this is helpful, you didn't ask this question, but the clarity on like masking indoors, our rule of thumb essentially is regardless of what state you're traveling to, regardless of what the facility policy is, so we know there's lots of states and lots of cities and whatnot that have different kinds of mask requirements. Even in Ohio, Columbus has a mask requirement for businesses, Cincinnati does not. Whoever's policy is the most restrictive is what students and travelers should follow at all times. So for example, you take students to a state that is not requiring masks. Xavier requires masks, so they should follow the most restrictive of the policies. Any other questions about trip and travel? Okay. Related to baseline, if you are working with a university affiliated organization like BSA or with an honor society, I think we had Kappa Delta Pi on this group, if you're working with RSA, which is a subordinate body, baseline would not apply to you. So I'll just work through this really quickly. Baseline essentially says every club needs to be performing at a bare minimum of activity. And so there's some different sort of levels of engagement that we're looking for with the baseline program. Groups that slip behind or fall under these baseline minimums, those groups will have 1 semester of probation as kind of a warning. And then if they do it for a 2nd semester in a row, we will shut the group down. The meeting requirement is that clubs will be required to hold at least 1 general member meeting per month. Based on the academic calendar, we interpret this as 3 meetings in the fall, roughly September, October, November, 4 meetings in the spring, January, February, March, April. The club should document meeting minutes and/or an agenda and upload that to EngageXU for verification. Faculty and staff engagement, same thing. The club officers should meet once a month with the faculty staff advisor. It should occur about 7 times a year. The documentation of those meetings should get uploaded. For many of your organizations, and for especially, I know several of you that are on this call, they're meeting weekly or every other week, and they're often meeting with you once a week or once every other week. So it's really easy for them to meet these baseline minimums. It's just simply the documentation part of saying like, yep, here you go. And what we tell the groups is we don't need them to upload every single time they have a meeting. We need them to meet the base, and that is there should be 3 uploads of meetings for general body meetings in the fall, 3 uploads for faculty staff advisor meetings in the fall. So they don't have to submit every week. It's not meant to be a punishment for groups that meet more frequently. It's just meant to say, yes, we are continuing to be active and meet these minimums. Groups were asked to complete a membership recruitment and retention plan. All of the groups, I believe, successfully have done this, basically saying we have an intentional way that we are going to recruit and retain members. Then clubs are required to hold at least 2 events per semester outside of a regular club meeting. An event could be a fundraiser, an event could be a service project, which is the next requirement. It's basically some sort of an activity, because we know many of our student organizations basically stopped functioning. They were barely holding meetings, they were rarely holding events. And so we want to make sure that everyone's operating at a level where they're at least keeping the heartbeat going. Service engagement. So because we're a Jesuit Catholic institution, we very much believe in service and in engaging students. So clubs have to participate in 1 service activity at some point throughout the year. Some of our groups do a significant amount of service, and that might even be what they do as an organization. Some of our groups, this will be a stretch because they'll have to figure out a way to engage their roster. There's certain activities like, for example, Muskeathon, Colleges Against Cancer, also Community Action Day, the National Day of Service that's coming up this weekend. Those activities are meant to be broad catches for groups who are looking for a way to create a service engagement. So like Muskeathon has said, we would love clubs to sign up and participate with us for our dance marathon, and we will count that as their service engagement because they're helping participate in another group's activity that is all about service and philanthropy. Then finally, clubs should spend about 85% or more of the funds allocated for this fiscal year, because we don't want that money to roll over that was meant to be used this year by students who are seniors and by students who are currently enrolled. They want to reap the benefits of that activity fee. Okay, any questions about the baseline program? All right, we're coming right up on an hour, so I'm going to open it up if there's any other questions anyone has. I'm going to stop my screen share and also stop the recording real quick.